One signature could make him a legend, or a cripple. The stadium roared, a tide of anticipation crashing against the artificial turf. Jake Reynolds, star quarterback of the Titans, felt the adrenaline spike as the clock ticked toward the final drive. A season's worth of hope, and $100 million contract, rested on his shoulders. Then came the hit. Not hard enough to knock him out, but precise. Twisting. A sickening snap from his spine that made him collapse to one knee, helmet hitting the grass with a muted thud that felt louder than any cheer. The crowd's roar became a distant blur. Pain shot through him, sharp and insistent. He tried to rise. Couldn't. The trainers sprinted, voices sharp, questioning, but he barely registered them. Only the pain. Only the fear. Later, in the sterile calm of the Titans' medical bay, the real gravity began to sink in. The MRI lights hummed, machines calibrated to detect more than just the obvious. This was not a simple injury, not a temporary setback. Something insidious lurked beneath the surface. Emma Carter stood over the monitor, eyes fixed on the images scrolling past. Her reputation as a rehabilitation expert was built on precision, impartiality, and a refusal to bend to any outside influence. Today, that meant evaluating the team's prized quarterback without concern for contracts, media pressure, or fan hysteria. Her assistant glanced nervously at the clock. "You'll need a preliminary report before the league meeting," he reminded her. Emma nodded, not looking away from the screen. "I'll need every scan. Full spinal assessment. Don't rush me." Her tone was calm, clinical, but firm enough to silence hesitation. Jake entered, leaning on his trainer for support. His helmet was off, sweat glistening on his forehead, eyes sharp despite the pain. He regarded Emma with a mixture of defiance and necessity. This wasn't just a doctor-patient encounter. This was his livelihood on the line. "Dr. Carter?" he asked, voice steady despite the tremor in his limbs. "I've been told you're the best." Emma didn't smile. "I'm thorough. That's what matters. Sit. We'll begin." As she guided him through the initial evaluation, she noticed subtle compensations in his posture, slight tilts, micro-movements that betrayed more than the visible bruise. Her fingers probed carefully, following the arc of his spine, noting resistance, tension, irregularities. "Have you experienced anything like this before?" she asked. He hesitated. "A sprain here and there, nothing serious. Never like this." His jaw tightened. "I need to play. My team, my family, everything depends on this season." Emma nodded, but said nothing. Her eyes scanned the data, connecting dots that even the player hadn't noticed. Patterns emerged, tiny, almost imperceptible degenerative changes, masked by years of overuse, constant impact, and insufficient recovery. Her hand hovered over the monitor, heart steady, mind calculating. One more season, she realized, could be catastrophic. "This is more than a routine check," she said finally, voice low. "If you push your body, the risk is permanent. Mobility may not recover." Jake froze. Words like paralysis didn't leave her mouth, but the weight of implication hung in the air. His mind raced. His family's debts. His father's legacy. The $1 million contract still dangling over the season. "I can't," he began, swallowing. "I can't just sit out. I have to play. I have to." His hand shook slightly. Pride, fear, obligation. A combination of everything he had trained to suppress. Emma studied him, not with judgment, but calculation. Her eyes softened slightly, not because she would bend, but because she recognized the man beneath the athlete, vulnerable, desperate, and human. "You're asking for a gamble," she said. "A calculated risk that could cost more than you can afford." He nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I know. I need to try. Just this season. Please. I'll follow your rehab, whatever it takes. No shortcuts. No lies." Emma paused, noting every micro-expression, every subtle plea. Finally, she nodded. "All right. We'll attempt intensive stabilization. Every session, every exercise will be monitored. No exceptions. But understand this. If your body fails, there's no undo button." Jake exhaled, a mixture of relief and tension flooding through him. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time in her career, Emma realized that this wasn't just rehabilitation. It was a moral negotiation, a delicate balance between professional ethics and human desperation. The season, and $100 million, rested on her judgment. And she would not fail. The first session was set. The room darkened for focus, monitors blinking, muscles straining. Two people, from completely different worlds, now bound by necessity, responsibility, and the fragile thread of trust. Hours passed. Exercises, stretches, assessments, notes. No one spoke more than necessary. Every movement observed, every microreaction noted. Yet, in those quiet hours, a subtle understanding began to form. A recognition that this collaboration, however professional at first, carried consequences neither could predict. And somewhere beneath the clinical urgency, a spark, a tentative, unspoken connection, began to flicker. The season had just begun, and so had their story. The MRI lights hummed, steady and unforgiving. Emma Carter's eyes scanned each frame with unwavering focus, noting angles, shadows, densities, every nuance that could indicate instability. Jake sat on the edge of the examination table, trying not to fidget, trying to keep the tension in his jaw from showing. He had played through pain before, ignored aches, pushed limits. But this was different. He could feel it in his core. Emma finally spoke, her voice low, measured, carrying the weight of facts. Jake, your spinal scans reveal a degenerative condition. Not just from the hit today, it's been developing for years. He froze. Degenerative. The words sounded distant, almost unreal. What does that mean? It means, she continued, carefully choosing each word, that one more full season at this intensity could lead to permanent damage. Paralysis is a real possibility. Jake's chest tightened. Every image, every statistic she had explained earlier came crashing down, but now he heard the verdict. His mind raced. His family's debts, the contract, the legacy of his father, all of it pressed against him like a physical weight. Isn't there surgery? Some procedure, he asked, desperation creeping into his tone. Emma shook her head. Surgery could stabilize the spine partially, but it would end your season immediately. Even with it, the risk remains high. My job is to tell you the truth. You are on borrowed time. He leaned back, eyes narrowing, trying to process. Borrowed time, that's it. One season, maybe two. One season, she said bluntly. Push beyond that, and you risk never walking again without assistance. He laughed bitterly, a sound that felt hollow in the sterile room. And the contract, 100 million. My family's debts, everything. If I sit out, it all disappears. Emma watched him, noting every micro-expression. Vulnerability, pride, fear, a perfect storm of human emotion. And if you play, you gamble with your life, she said. Is that a risk you're willing to take? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to fight panic with logic. It's not just my choice, he admitted quietly. It's my family's survival. The money, it's the only way to fix what my father left behind. They'll starve if I don't. Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard, documenting her findings, but her mind was on him. Not the player, not the star, but the man before her. She could see the desperation, the tight grip on hope that had nothing to do with fame or glory. You're asking me to approve something I cannot ethically recommend, she said finally. One season under this condition is a gamble that could ruin your life. I cannot lie and sign off without risking my license and my conscience. Jake opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. I'm not asking for a lie, he said firmly. I'm asking for your help to stabilize me, to give me a chance. I don't need guarantees, just a fighting chance. Emma looked away, her jaw set tight. For a decade, she had been a wall that no agent or athlete could climb. To agree was to violate the very foundation of her career. You're asking me to walk a legal minefield, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous level. If the board sees this as anything other than standard recovery, I'm finished. I don't care about your money, Jake. But I do care about not being the person who helps you ruin your life. If I do this, it's not because you're a star. It's because you're desperate enough to listen. She stared at the scans, the cold data fighting her instinct to help. Only after a long, heavy silence did she finally nod. Intensive rehabilitation. But understand this. The moment your metrics slip or you take a shortcut, I shut this down. No arguments. He nodded. I'll follow it. Every hour. Every exercise. I swear. She studied him, seeing not arrogance, but determination, not ignorance, but calculated risk. Then we'll try? But understand this, she said, locking eyes with him. If you push beyond what your body can handle, there is no coming back. You will not just lose a season, you may lose mobility. Forever. I understand, he said, voice steady despite the storm of fear inside him. I've never been more aware of anything in my life. Emma paused, documenting her findings, noting compliance and willingness to engage in therapy. Good. We start tonight. Every session monitored, every movement logged. We have one goal: get you through the season without permanent injury. Anything beyond that is your choice, not mine. Jake swallowed, feeling the gravity of what she had just said. The season, the contract, the family's debts, they all loomed. And yet, in that sterile room, he realized he had someone in his corner, someone who would not bend for money or fame, someone whose integrity matched the stakes he faced. Emma, meanwhile, felt the weight of her own decision. She had just agreed to walk a razor's edge between ethics and compassion, between following rules and acknowledging human desperation. The first night of rehabilitation began in silence. Machines whirred, muscles were tested, resistance carefully applied. Neither spoke beyond what was necessary, yet the connection was forming, a bridge between athlete and healer, desperation and integrity, ambition and caution. Hours passed. Sweat, strain, and controlled movements dominated the session. And in the quiet intervals between exercises, brief glances and subtle nods suggested a tentative trust. This was no longer just about treatment. It was about responsibility, risk, and a fragile human bond forming in the shadow of potential catastrophe. The season had not yet begun, and already, the stakes were higher than any game he had played. The gym was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady whir of resistance machines. Jake leaned against a wall, hands pressed into the cool metal, chest heaving, not from exertion but from anxiety. He had replayed this moment countless times in his head. How he would approach Emma, what words he would choose, how to balance desperation and dignity. When she entered, clipboard in hand, posture precise and professional, he straightened instinctively. Her eyes flicked up briefly, evaluating him, then returned to the notes she had made from the previous sessions. She didn't greet him. She never did. Her attention was a scalpel. I need to talk, Jake said, voice low but firm. Emma didn't look up immediately. This isn't a consultation time, she said. You're scheduled for therapy. He stepped closer. I'm asking for a moment. Please. She finally met his eyes. There was a hesitation, a brief, almost imperceptible pause. Go on, she said. Jake exhaled, swallowing nerves and pride alike. I need this season, he said, words spilling out in a rush. Not for fame, not for glory. My family, my debts, everything rests on this contract. I can't let it slip. If I sit out, it's not just money. It's survival. Emma's expression remained unreadable. She folded her arms, head tilted slightly. You're asking me to take a calculated risk on your health for financial reasons. That's unusual. I know, he said, stepping closer, feeling the vulnerability and laying bare his motives. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking for your guidance. Your help. Intensive therapy, monitoring, whatever it takes. I just need a chance to finish the season. She studied him, noting the tension in his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his eyes betrayed a mixture of fear and resolve. This was no longer the arrogant star quarterback she'd seen on the field. This was a man carrying the weight of responsibility, desperation, and hope simultaneously. You understand the stakes, she said, voice low, precise. One misstep, one overexertion, and you could, lose mobility permanently. I do, he said, jaw tight. And I accept that risk. But I need someone who knows what they're doing, someone I can trust to get me through it. Emma's gaze softened slightly, though her voice did not. Trust is earned. And this is not just about what I can do. It's about what you're willing to follow. Every protocol, every rule, every exercise. No exceptions. I'll follow everything, he promised, the words heavy with sincerity. No shortcuts. No lying. I swear. She nodded once, decisively. All right. We'll attempt intensive stabilization. You will be monitored continuously, every session logged, every movement scrutinized. But understand this. This is not a guarantee. You play, you gamble. If your body fails, it's permanent. Jake exhaled, tension melting into relief. I understand. And thank you for even considering this. They began the first session immediately. The room was dim, machines humming, each movement deliberate. Jake moved under Emma's strict guidance, muscles straining, spine aligning as precisely as possible. She corrected every posture, every angle, her eyes sharp, hands steady. Hours passed. Sweat slicked his skin. Muscles burned. Pain radiated through him, but so did focus. Emma's presence was both demanding and stabilizing, a tether keeping him from pushing past his limit while coaxing the best from his body. During breaks, neither spoke much, but glances lingered longer than necessary. In subtle ways, a slight nod, a gentle adjustment of posture, a reassuring tap on a shoulder, they acknowledged a connection forming. Not romantic, not yet, but trust, dependence, something unspoken, fragile, and necessary. Jake finally collapsed onto the mat, muscles trembling. I didn't know it could feel like this. Therapy, he said, a wry, exhausted smile breaking through. Emma adjusted a strap, her fingers brushing against his arm longer than necessary, then withdrew immediately. This is only the beginning, she said, voice firm but not unkind. We have a season to get through. Every session counts. He looked at her, catching the brief flicker in her eyes. Concern, focus, something more subtle. I'll make it count, he said, determination grounding him. For the first time, both realized that this professional engagement carried the seeds of something more: trust, understanding, perhaps even an unspoken bond. In the quiet gym, under the sterile lights, two people from different worlds began to navigate the precarious intersection of ambition, desperation, and humanity. The season hadn't even started, and already, their story had begun. The night was quiet, the stadium lights long gone, leaving only the hum of the city beyond the clinic walls. The rehabilitation room was empty except for the faint whir of treadmills and the rhythmic beeping of monitors. It had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the world outside, with its contracts, media scrutiny, and relentless expectations, did not exist. Jake adjusted the harness on his back, following Emma's precise instructions. Every stretch, every posture, every micro-movement was under her vigilant eye. The physical strain was immense, but the psychological weight was heavier. You're pushing too far, she said, adjusting his shoulder, her fingers brushing briefly against his skin. She pulled back immediately, professional. Yet there was a tension in the air, a fragile intimacy that neither dared acknowledge openly. I'm fine, he said, voice tight, though he felt the heat from the contact linger longer than it should. I need this. One more set. Emma's eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. Fine, she said, voice quieter than usual. But you stop if I say so. Hours passed. The room grew warmer with effort, the air thick with exertion and the faint scent of sweat. With every guided movement, Jake's body responded, muscles stretching, spine aligning. But their proximity created another kind of tension, one neither protocol nor logic could fully address. During a brief pause, Jake sat on the edge of the mat, leaning forward, elbows on knees. I don't usually talk about this, he admitted, voice low. Most people see me as just a player. Strong, unbreakable, untouchable. But it's not true. I'm scared. Emma's gaze met his. I see that, she said softly. I see the man behind the stats, behind the plays. You're not a machine. You're human, vulnerable, responsible, terrified. And that matters. He swallowed, taking in her words. They weren't judgmental. They weren't professional distance. They were acknowledgement, validation, a lifeline. For the first time, Jake felt he could breathe without pretense. I've never met anyone who treats me like that, he said. Not just the player, the person. Emma looked away briefly, returning to adjust a strap on the machine. You're learning to trust the process, she said, more to herself than to him. And me, by extension. Their eyes met again. And this time, the space between professional and personal seemed to narrow imperceptibly. Neither spoke further. Words were dangerous. Trust was fragile. But in that quiet room, every glance, every fleeting touch, every shared moment of exertion carried weight far beyond the physical. Later, as the session ended, they walked to the locker room side by side. Silence stretched comfortably. Jake finally broke it. Thanks, he said, for seeing me. Emma nodded, a faint acknowledgement. It's my job to observe. But sometimes, observation reveals more than expected. Outside, the night was cool, almost crisp. They parted ways without ceremony, without unnecessary words, yet the memory of that shared intensity lingered. Each knew the other would return, and that with each session, the bond, professional at first, undeniably personal now, would grow. In the sterile, controlled environment of therapy, in the shadows away from fans, cameras, and agents, something delicate had begun, a connection built on trust, exertion, and shared vulnerability. The season was far from over. The stakes remained immense. But within that quiet, hidden world, two people found a closeness that no scoreboard or contract could dictate. And with every secret session, the line between healer and athlete blurred just a little more. As the pressure from Marcus intensified, the clinic was no longer safe. Their sessions moved to the shadows of a rented room on the outskirts of the city. In the cramped, dim space, the professional distance they had maintained so fiercely finally began to erode, replaced by a desperate, silent reliance on one another. "You're pushing too fast again," Emma said, adjusting his posture. Her fingers grazed his shoulder, light but deliberate. She retracted immediately, yet the subtle contact lingered in the air between them. "I'm fine," Jake said, voice low, but there was a hint of a smile, aware of the tension. "I can handle it. You know that." Emma's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. "You know I'll stop you if you push too far," she replied, equally low, eyes scanning every muscle, every micromovement. Hours passed in an unspoken rhythm. Exercise, monitoring, correction, and occasional moments when their hands brushed or eyes met in quiet acknowledgement. The physical closeness was unavoidable. The emotional closeness began to grow alongside it. During a brief pause, Jake sat on the edge of the mat, leaning back slightly. "I didn't expect this," he admitted, voice quieter now. "I thought rehab would be clinical, detached, strict." But he trailed off, glancing at her, eyes softening. "I feel like we're connected, not just through therapy." Emma's fingers lingered on his arm, adjusting a strap. Then she withdrew immediately, but the tension remained. "It's complicated," she said, carefully measured. "You're a patient, and I'm responsible for your health. But you're also more than that, aren't you?" Jake nodded, swallowing. "I didn't plan for this either, but I can't ignore it." His eyes held hers, searching, honest, vulnerable. "I trust you, and I care about you, more than I probably should." Emma's breath caught for a fraction of a second. Professional boundaries warned her, ethics screamed restraint. But there was a human truth she could not deny. "We have to be careful," she said, voice low. "The moment someone finds out, your agent, the league, anyone, we both lose. My license, your career, our lives outside this room." "I know," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I don't care about the consequences. Not right now. Not when I'm with you." A charged silence followed, filled with unspoken agreement and unacknowledged desire. Neither moved too quickly, respecting the fragile line between professional and personal. But the energy was undeniable, a quiet intensity that neither could ignore. As the session concluded, they sat side by side, muscles fatigued, sweat glistening, breathing heavy but hearts heavier. The room was dim, shadows wrapping around them. Jake's hand brushed against Emma's briefly, intentional yet cautious. She didn't pull away. "You should get some rest," she said softly, closing her tablet. Her voice carried warmth beneath the professionalism. "I will," he replied, glancing at her, a faint smile breaking through the tension. "And thank you for everything, not just the therapy, but this, for trusting me with your time." Emma gave a brief nod, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We're in this together," she said. "But remember, discretion is crucial. Public eyes can ruin more than just reputations." Jake exhaled, leaning back slightly, letting the weight of the session and the unspoken connection settle. "I understand, but it doesn't make it any less real." The night deepened outside. No one else existed here, just two people, bound by trust, desire, and a precarious secret. In those hours, the professional framework blurred, creating a private space where human vulnerability and connection could exist without judgment. And though the world outside would never know, within these walls, they had discovered a rare, fragile intimacy, a bond formed through challenge, struggle, and mutual understanding. The season remained uncertain. The stakes remained high. But for this moment, and the ones to follow, they had each other. The office of Marcus Lane smelled faintly of expensive cologne and leather, a curated image of power and control. He leaned back in his chair, thumbs steepled, eyes fixed on a photograph of Jake Reynolds mid-play. The quarterback looked perfect, poised, invincible. Yet Marcus knew better. Reports had trickled in over the past few weeks. Unusually frequent therapy sessions, late-night visits, whispered conversations that lingered too long. Marcus didn't need proof yet. He had instinct. A predator's instinct honed over decades of contracts, negotiations, and subtle manipulation. Something was off. He picked up his phone, calling an operative he had placed near the rehab clinic. "Surveillance," he said, voice calm but sharp. "Track Dr. Carter. Every movement. Log her sessions with Reynolds. I want full details, locations, times, interactions. And I want it discreet. I don't want a leak, but I need confirmation of my suspicions." Minutes later, Jake arrived at the clinic, still sore from the previous night's intensive session. Emma was already there, reviewing charts, her posture rigid with professionalism. He approached cautiously, aware of the fatigue in his body and the growing tension in the air. "Morning," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. Emma nodded, not looking up. "Morning. Let's begin. Adjustments today will focus on core stabilization and spinal alignment. No shortcuts." Jake complied, stretching, bending, and following her every instruction. Yet beneath the surface, he felt the subtle pressure of external forces closing in. Something in the way Emma's phone buzzed repeatedly, notifications silenced but persistent, made him uneasy. Hours later, Emma excused herself briefly to answer a call. Jake overheard fragments, a stern male voice, mentions of contract, exposure, and evidence. He froze. His heart skipped a beat. Returning to her station, she didn't mention the call. She adjusted the resistance bands, eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "Let's continue," she said. But there was a slight tension in her jaw, a hesitation she didn't normally show. Jake's mind raced. Could Marcus be watching? Had he already noticed their closeness? The thought made the sweat on his back feel heavier, the exercises more taxing. He realized that their secret was no longer safe. Outside, Marcus's operative relayed updates in real time. Every meeting, every session, every small touch was cataloged. Marcus reviewed the feed on his tablet, a slow smile forming. Knowledge was power, and power gave him control over both Jake and Emma, if he chose to exercise it. Inside the clinic, Emma and Jake pushed through the final exercises, muscles screaming, spines protesting. Yet neither spoke of the outside pressure. The silent understanding was palpable. They both felt it, even without words. After the session, Jake lingered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Do you think anyone's watching?" he asked cautiously, voice low. Emma's eyes met his, serious. "If they are, we'll adjust. No mistakes, no evidence, no room for exposure. We protect your health and my license at all costs." He nodded, trusting her judgment, but the tension remained, a new, invisible opponent in the room with them. Marcus's presence, though unseen, altered the space, making each touch, each glance, each session a potential liability. Later that evening, Marcus reviewed every frame again. He didn't speak, but the intensity in his eyes suggested strategy, manipulation, and a lurking threat. He wasn't just an agent anymore. He was a shadow over every rehabilitation session, a predator circling two people who had no idea how close he already was. Jake and Emma left the clinic, unaware of the surveillance, unaware of the stakes beyond their immediate concern. Yet the invisible tension was real. Every movement, every interaction now carried risk, not only for their careers, but for the fragile bond forming between them. The game had changed, and Marcus was playing to win. The knock on Emma's office door was soft, almost polite. But the moment Marcus Lane stepped inside, the air shifted. His presence carried the weight of power, intimidation, and menace, a predator with control over everything she held dear. "Evening, Dr. Carter," he said smoothly, closing the door behind him. The sunlight had faded. The room was bathed in the cold glare of fluorescent light. "We need to talk." Emma straightened, clipboard in hand, masking tension with professionalism. "I assume this is about Jake's rehabilitation?" Marcus shook his head, a faint smirk on his lips. "It's about a lot more than that. You and I both know your relationship with him has complications." Complications that the league, the media, and the ethics committee would find deeply troubling. Emma's jaw tightened. I'm aware of my responsibilities. I've kept everything strictly professional and public. Oh, you've been careful, he said, pacing slowly. But I've seen everything. Late-night sessions, personal check-ins, extended therapy outside official hours. I have documentation, photographs, messages, evidence of a relationship that should never exist. Her heart skipped, adrenaline spiking. And if you choose to expose it, she asked, voice steady despite the cold knot in her stomach. Marcus's smile widened. Then your license is gone. Instantly. And Jake? He loses the contract. Every cent, every endorsement, every game. Not to mention the public fallout. You're jeopardizing him, his career, and his family's security. All for feelings? Emma's mind raced. Threats to her license were serious, permanent, career-ending. But the threat to Jake, the human, not the athlete, was unbearable. She clenched her fists, steadying herself. I won't let you use him as leverage, she said firmly. Marcus paused, tilting his head. I'm not asking for negotiation. I'm giving an ultimatum. Sign off on the final medical approval by Friday. Or I release everything. You lose your license. Jake loses everything, and neither of you recover from the fallout. Emma's pulse quickened. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest. Her integrity, her career, her moral compass, everything balanced on a razor's edge. Yet she could not ignore the desperation she saw in Jake's eyes, the trust he had placed in her hands. I understand the stakes, she said, voice controlled, though her hands trembled slightly. But I will not compromise the patient's health or my conscience under threat. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. Then consider this your final warning. Discretion is your friend, Dr. Carter. Make the right choice, or watch everything you care about crumble. He turned on his heel and left, the echo of his footsteps reverberating in the office like a ticking clock. Emma exhaled, pressing her forehead against the cold edge of her desk. She had always known that her role carried responsibility, but now the stakes were personal, professional, and devastatingly intertwined. Later, as Jake arrived for his session, Emma faced him, her expression grave. Marcus knows, she said simply. He knows about us. About our sessions. About everything. Jake's eyes widened. What does that mean? Emma swallowed, steadying herself. He's threatening to expose our relationship. If he does, I lose my license. You lose your contract. And it won't be pretty. The league doesn't forgive this kind of impropriety. Jake's fists clenched. So we just give up? Let him win. Emma shook her head, resolve hardening. No. We find another way. We protect your health, my license, and us. But we cannot be reckless. Every move from here on must be calculated. Every session, every interaction, every word is a potential weapon or a shield. Jake nodded, understanding the gravity. Fear, anger, and determination burned inside him. Then we fight. Together. In the quiet room, surrounded by medical equipment and faint city lights, two people weighed morality against survival, ethics against desire, and love against ambition. The danger was real, immediate, and personal, and yet, it only strengthened the bond forming between them. The game had shifted. The stakes were higher than ever. And Marcus, invisible yet omnipresent, loomed over every decision, every heartbeat, every shared moment. But for Emma and Jake, the choice was clear. Protect each other, no matter the cost. The clinic felt smaller somehow, suffocating under the weight of the unspoken. The hum of machines and faint scent of disinfectant could not mask the tension coiling between them. Emma stood by the therapy table, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the exercises Jake was about to perform. But she wasn't really looking at him. She was thinking about Marcus's words, the looming deadline, the impossible choice. Jake adjusted the harness around his shoulders, feeling the tightness of muscles already fatigued from yesterday's session. You've been quiet, he said, voice tentative. What's going on? Emma's gaze met his, sharp and heavy. Marcus isn't bluffing, she said. He knows everything. Every session, every late-night visit. He can destroy me. And you. Do you understand what that means? Jake's jaw tightened. He swallowed, anger and frustration bubbling beneath the surface. I get it, he said. But I can't just walk away. You think I don't want to protect myself too? My family depends on this. Everything depends on it. You're thinking about money and contracts, she shot back, voice rising slightly, shaking with tension. I'm thinking about life, Jake. Your life. One misstep, and you could end up paralyzed. One bad decision, and I lose my career, and you lose everything. I won't risk that. I'm not asking you to. Jake snapped, the edge in his voice sharper than he intended. I'm asking you to trust me to make decisions for myself. To let me fight for my family. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the resistance bands. Fight for your family? At the cost of your body? At the cost of my license? Do you understand what's at stake here? Jake leaned forward, frustration spilling over. Do you understand my world, Emma? My life isn't a spreadsheet of risks and protocols. People depend on me. People who'll starve if I don't play this season. You think you're the only one with responsibility. For a moment, silence. The machines hummed, the lights flickered slightly, and the weight of the argument settled heavily in the air. Both were breathing hard, both aware of the widening chasm between them. Emma's voice softened, but only slightly. I do understand your responsibility. I do. But responsibility is more than ambition and money. It's about survival, yes, but also about integrity. You can't survive if you're broken beyond repair. Jake's shoulders slumped slightly, but defiance remained. Then maybe your integrity isn't enough for my reality, he muttered. Maybe you can't see the world the way I have to live it. The room felt colder now, distance growing, trust fraying. The bond they had been building, the quiet understanding, the subtle closeness, was now threatened by pressure, fear, and impossible stakes. Emma swallowed, taking a deep breath. I'm not giving up on you, she said finally, voice quieter but steady. But you have to understand, I can't compromise my ethics. I won't. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt warping his features. And I can't compromise my family's future, he said, softer now, tinged with regret. I just don't know if we can do both. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of moral dilemmas, fear, and unspoken feelings. Both understood that the path forward was treacherous, with no clear answers, only choices that could destroy or save them. Finally, Emma straightened, returning to her clipboard. We continue with therapy. Every session, every exercise, every precaution. That's our compromise for now. We do what we can. But beyond that, I can't promise more than that without risking everything. Jake nodded reluctantly, understanding the fragile truce. All right, he said, voice low. For now. The session resumed, each movement precise, careful, controlled, but the tension lingered, like a storm waiting to break. Trust had not been destroyed, but it had been shaken, leaving both acutely aware of the stakes, professional, personal, and deeply human. Outside, the city lights flickered, indifferent to the moral battleground within. Inside, two people continued to navigate the impossible, ambition, desire, ethics, and love, all colliding under the relentless pressure of one man's manipulation. The moral divide was real, and it was only growing. The press conference hall was alive with the buzz of cameras, reporters, and flashing lights. Jake Reynolds sat at the table, suit perfectly tailored, smile fixed in place, but beneath it, tension gripped him like a vice. Every reporter in the room wanted his story, his contract, his injury, his future, and Marcus Lane hovered near the edge, a predator cloaked in impeccable etiquette. Emma Carter stood just behind the cameras, clipboard in hand, heart pounding. She had rehearsed her words, her statements, and her boundaries 100 times, yet the enormity of the moment pressed down on her chest. This was not just a medical assessment. This was exposure, risk, and integrity colliding under the scrutiny of the world. Marcus approached, smooth, confident. You know the rules, he whispered, just enough for both to hear. Sign off on the medical clearance, or everything goes public. Emma's eyes met Jake's across the room. In that instant, words were unnecessary. She saw fear, desperation, and trust intertwined in his gaze. She also saw something deeper. The man he was beyond the spotlight. The one whose life she had pledged to protect. Jake swallowed, taking a deep breath. He adjusted his tie and looked back at the sea of reporters. Marcus's presence was a shadow, but he refused to yield. Not this time. Emma stepped forward as the microphones were being adjusted. Her voice, steady and deliberate, carried across the hall. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Emma Carter, medical consultant for Jake Reynolds. I am here to speak not just as a physician, but as someone committed to the health and safety of athletes everywhere. The room quieted, cameras clicking, reporters leaning forward. After careful review of Mr. Reynolds' condition, she continued, "It is my professional opinion that any full-contact play at this level carries significant risk of permanent injury. While rehabilitation has allowed him to maintain mobility and strength, continuing without modification could result in lifelong consequences." A murmur ran through the room. Marcus's jaw tightened subtly. Emma didn't flinch. She paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Furthermore, I believe this case highlights the urgent need for updated safety standards for all players. Contracts and financial incentives should never outweigh an athlete's health or long-term quality of life." The reporters scribbled, cameras flashed. Jake's pulse raced, not from anger or fear, but from awe at her courage. She had just publicly acknowledged the danger while protecting him personally. Marcus stepped forward, voice controlled but sharp. "Dr. Carter, are you refusing to approve the clearance?" Emma held his gaze steadily. "I am refusing to certify clearance that could endanger a player. However, I am not revealing Mr. Reynolds' personal health beyond what is necessary for the discussion of player safety. His privacy remains intact." Jake exhaled quietly, relief washing over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a measure of control return, not over contracts or agents, but over his own life. Marcus's eyes narrowed, but he knew the public nature of her statement made further threats risky. The balance had shifted. Integrity had won over intimidation, even if it came at a personal cost to both Emma and Jake. Marcus intercepted her near the exit, his face contorted with quiet fury. "You think you're a hero, Emma? I still have the photos. I'll leak them by midnight and watch your career burn." Emma didn't flinch. She leaned in close, her voice a cold, sharp whisper. "Those photos were taken via illegal surveillance inside a private medical facility, Marcus. If you release them, my countersuit for wiretapping and criminal breach of privacy will bankrupt your agency before I even reach the ethics board. You already lost the player. Don't lose your firm, too." Marcus froze, the realization hitting him. He looked at her, saw the absolute resolve in her eyes, and slowly backed away. After the press conference, in a quiet corridor behind the hall, Jake approached Emma. You didn't have to do that," he said, voice soft, gratitude and admiration in equal measure. Emma shook her head. "I had to. For you. For every athlete. For myself. But it wasn't easy. I risked everything today." Jake smiled faintly, stepping closer. "And I'll never forget it. You saved me, in more ways than one." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the conference fading behind them. Cameras, agents, contracts, all of it irrelevant now. Only the trust, the shared risk, and the unspoken connection remained. The season, the money, and the external pressures might have been lost or altered, but the bond they had forged in secrecy, sweat, and trust was unbroken. And for the first time, it felt like they could face the future, together, with integrity intact and hearts aligned. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the small, critical victory that had just taken place. Inside, two people emerged stronger, closer, and ready to navigate the life they had chosen, on their own terms. The game wasn't over, but for now, they had won the only victory that truly mattered: truth, trust, and each other. The stadium was empty now, echoes of cheers long gone, the field bathed in the soft gold of a late afternoon sun. Jake Reynolds stood near the sidelines, wearing casual clothes instead of a jersey, clipboard in hand, whistle around his neck. The stands were silent, the press long departed, and the hum of cameras absent. This was no longer the arena of contracts, fame, or scrutiny. It was simply a field, a space for growth, learning, and second chances. Emma approached quietly, her steps soft on the turf. She carried a small bag of medical supplies, her practical clothing a stark contrast to the professional attire she had once worn in conference rooms and clinics. The sunlight caught in her hair, highlighting a smile that was both warm and unguarded. "Hey," Jake said, turning, eyes lighting up at the sight of her. "You made it." "Of course I did," she replied, placing the bag down. "It's not every day I get to see my favorite quarterback become a coach instead of a cautionary tale." Jake chuckled, a sound free of tension and full of relief. "Yeah, things turned out differently than planned. Emma leaned against the goalpost, eyes scanning the empty field. But better, don't you think? Health intact, integrity intact, and a chance to make a real difference. Not contracts, not endorsements, just people and guidance. Jake nodded, his gaze meeting hers. I wouldn't be here without you. Not just surviving, actually choosing this life. You made me see that there's more to winning than touchdowns and money. She smiled, small and genuine. And you reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place, not for accolades, but to help people, even when the system is stacked against them. They walked together to the center of the field, the grass soft beneath their shoes. No press, no agents, no deadlines, just quiet, and the faint scent of earth and sun. Jake stopped, turning toward her. So, no cameras, no contracts, no pressure? Emma shook her head, voice gentle. Just us. And the choices we made. That's enough. He reached for her hand, a touch light but deliberate. She let him take it, their fingers intertwining naturally. There was no urgency, no need for secrecy, no invisible threats looming over them. Just presence, trust, and the quiet understanding that they had survived the game of fame, ambition, and threats together. For a long moment, they stood there, hands clasped, gazing at the empty field. The world beyond the stadium could wait. The victories and losses of the past were irrelevant now. What mattered was here, in the quiet sunlight, in the simplicity of being together. Jake looked at the empty stands, then back at Emma. The silence was a stark contrast to the roar he had lived for, and for a moment, the ghost of his old life felt heavy. It's a lot quieter than I expected, he said, his voice grounded. No $100 million contracts. No roar of the crowd. Just a whistle and a clipboard. Emma stepped closer, her hand finding his. The roar was never going to last, Jake. But being able to walk off this field on your own 2 feet, that's a win nobody can take from you. He squeezed her hand, a small, weary smile breaking through. I guess I traded the spotlight for the sun. I can live with that trade. Good, she replied, her eyes reflecting the fading light. Because I'm not here for the star quarterback. I'm just here for the man. They walked down the sideline together, side by side, leaving footprints in the grass that would fade with time, just as the pressures of their old lives had. In their place was a new story, one of resilience, trust, and love built not on ambition or secrecy, but on shared truth and mutual respect. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the field, they paused once more. Jake turned to Emma. Ready for the next season? He asked, voice half teasing, half serious. Emma smiled, eyes shining. The only season that matters is the one we choose together. And with that, they walked off the field, leaving the game, and all its pressures, behind. For once, the scoreboard didn't matter. The only victory that counted was theirs. The story ended not with fame or fortune, but with 2 people choosing life, love, and integrity. Out of the game, but fully alive.